Very talented young man.
That was a lot of fun. You know I like the challenge.
Really? We're going from a hot job.
Barely made it.
Alright, I'll go ahead and keep going. These folks can probably hear me. I'm pretty loud. My name is John Ball. I am a park ranger with Tennessee State Park. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out again today, or coming out for the first time today to Alvin C. State Historic Park for our big centennial celebration of the end of the First World War. This conflict was unlike anything mankind had ever experienced. The technologies that were being utilized during this war were the pinnacle of the scientific and manufacturing world at the time. So many of y'all, I'm assuming, got a chance to walk down through this trench over the course of yesterday afternoon. And if you haven't, I highly encourage you, once we conclude this program, to take a trip down through there. For those of you that made it, you may have gotten a feeling of what it was like, just a little bit, for those soldiers down in those trenches on the front line. But the one we have here is a lot nicer than what many of these soldiers would have experienced. There would have been a lot more mud. We're lucky enough to have a floor and some corrugated iron there to protect the walls. These men lived constantly in not only squalor-like conditions, but also the noises, the smells of the battlefield were very assaulting to the senses. Many of you have probably noticed behind us the artillery piece. Cannons just like that, numbering in the thousands, tens of thousands, were firing millions and millions of shells over the course of this war. Literally over 1 trillion artillery shells were fired during the First World War. Now, some of those shells were high explosive shells. Whenever they arrived, it was pretty obvious. There's a very big explosion. Some of them exploded on impact. Some of them would explode before hitting the ground in order to rain shrapnel down on the enemy. Some of them were smoke rounds to create smoke screens in order to hide the movements of troops. But a great many of them contained poison gas. Now, if you've ever fired weapons, you know that every now and then you get a dud. It was the same back then. Some of those artillery shells that were fired never went off. They just buried in the ground. There's still thousands of them out there today. They find them all the time. So if you're in the trench and you hear the incoming rounds, you hear it thud in the ground and there's no explosion, probably a sigh of relief, right? Well, the gas rounds fired out of these artillery pieces sounded just like a dud. There was no big explosion. That round would impact into the ground and then shortly thereafter release that deadly gas. So how many of y'all believe in ghosts or monsters? Some of you may not, that's fine, but think about this. What's the scary thing about ghosts? You can't see them. They can make things happen and you don't know they're there. The most widely used gas, responsible for well over 75 to 80% of all casualties associated with gas during the First World War, was called phosgene. Now, phosgene is invisible. It has no color. Much like the air around us, when phosgene gas arrives, you can't see it. Phosgene gas also does not immediately affect your body. So you might be exposed to that chemical and inhale a large quantity of it before you ever realize you're getting gas. the one distinctive element that did help soldiers recognize that particular chemical agent was it had a distinct odor. That odor was described by many soldiers as being somewhat pleasant. They said it smelled like hay or freshly mowed grass. So think about the squalor that they're living in. You may be able to imagine the offensive smells that are walking across the battlefield. What do you think your first reaction would be if amongst all of those horrid, rancid smells, a more pleasant odor enters your nose? You're probably going to breathe deep. Now, as the war progresses and the use of phosgene gas becomes much wider, obviously these men know what it smells like. So whenever that smell arrives, they know it's time to put their masks on. Once the masks go on, there's another element of this particular weapon that may become a little more evident to us. So for now, let's see what that might look like. Yes! So right now, that rattling noise is a gas alarm. Whenever someone detected the presence of gas, there would have been alarms all along the trench immediately sounded. These men were experts at putting those masks on in as short a time as possible.
Stand on the wall!
They're going to get pretty good at it. This sort of stuff happens a lot.
Open fire!
What y'all are hearing? Oftentimes, a gas attack is going to be followed by an infantry attack. A couple things to consider. For those of us who can see, can y'all stand up and turn around for me? Take a look at these men. Those masks are terrifying. How many horror movies have we seen where somebody wearing a gas mask is chopping people up? There's a reason that connotation exists. Once these masks go on, now the man to your right and left, the guy that might be your best friend, the guy that you've been through hell with, he doesn't look like him anymore. You can't see his face, but you know that's him. Think about the enemy. If the enemy is advancing and they have their masks on, what do they look like? Do they look like men? Or do they look like monsters? They don't have faces, they all look the same. You guys can take your masks off now, thank you. You're incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah, give them a round of applause, that's not fun. And that's great. So over the course of the war, you have hundreds and thousands of casualties. if not more. Probably a lot more, actually. You're probably looking at about 10%. Give or take a few percentage points of those casualties that were actually due to gas. Now, you might think, one of the things that I've always heard about the First World War is poison gas. Everybody used poison gas, how bad it was, and it was terrible. But what made it a truly effective weapon on the battlefield was not the ability of that gas to injure the enemy, but the ability of that weapon to injure the enemy's mind. Gas turned into a very powerful psychological weapon. Everything that I've just said, these men looking like monsters, the fact that gases like phosgene could not be seen and had properties similar to specters or ghosts, they're indiscriminate. If you're hit with a bullet, there's no doubt that there's a man some distance away from you who aimed that rifle and pulled the trigger. Gas, on the other hand, does not care. It envelops you. It's almost like it has a mind of its own. Now, we've been exposed to Hollywood horror for most of our lives. These sorts of things we're used to. That stuff did not exist in 1917, 1918, and earlier years of the war. So in these guys' minds, it was like it was a real monster. It was a real thing that they were fighting, but the only way they could defend themselves is putting that mask on. And the mask will only protect you against some of those gases. How many of y'all have heard of mustard gas? Probably a lot of you. Mustard gas is, without a doubt, the worst of the poison gases used during the First World War. What makes it so terrible is you do not have to inhale it or get it inside your body for it to cause you harm. Any bit of exposed skin that comes in contact with that chemical or that gas cloud as it creeps across your position is going to experience chemical burns. So when these guys had their masks on, you could see their hands. It's a pretty critical thing to be working right for a soldier, would you agree? Their necks, their ears, those are all going to be exposed and experience burns. And it doesn't stop there. Anything that that gas comes in contact with as it passes across an area will be left with a certain residue on it. That chemical will stay behind after the cloud is dissipated. So now, not only is their exposed skin experiencing chemical burns, their uniforms are contaminated. And once that mask comes off, if they were to wipe their brow or brush up against it with any other part of skin that previously had not been exposed, very likely now is experiencing the same chemical burn that their hands and ears and necks would have been. This war was horrific. If there's one thing that human beings are good at, it's killing each other and finding better ways to kill each other. Without you folks coming out here today to learn about the stories of these men, the suffering that they endured, this story will die. There are no more veterans of the First World War left. They're gone. And if we don't carry on their legacy and remember their sacrifices, it's going to be forgotten. So again, I want to thank you for coming out today to share this very special Veterans Day with us here at the park. And if you have any further questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I'll be hanging around up here. You're more than welcome to head down into the trench. I believe our next program will be taking place at 10 o'clock. So again, thanks for coming, guys. We really appreciate it.